Hi, this is Ben Schwartz. I'm the host of Emphasis Massachusetts, and thanks for watching. I'm talking today with three leaders of the labor movement here in Massachusetts. On my left is Joe Carlson. He's the president of Central Massachusetts AFL-CIO. Ed Collins, who is the IBEW Second District International Representative for the New England States, and executive vice president of the AFL-CIO from Massachusetts. Hi, Ed. How are you?
Hi.
And Fiore Grassetti, who is the newly elected president of Pioneer Valley AFL-CIO. Welcome, Fiore.
Thank you.
And to you, Joe.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, you all have, long roots in the labor movement, obviously, and you've been involved, part of it for a long time. And just wanted to get introduced to you by discussing your roots of the labor movement, how long you've been involved, what your current roles are. Joe, can we start with you?
Sure. I've been involved actually. I actually earn a living. I'm an international rep for the United Steelworkers America, and probably somewhat of 30 years ago, getting hired in a plant that was organized under the steelworkers, and then I got involved on the various committees, and from that point on, it may be a decade later, I was the local president. And from the position of being the local president, I was years later appointed to the international staff. And one thing that, just so people get a handle on how it works, is all of the various labor unions, would it be the steel workers, the iron workers, the IBEW, we all work together under an organization that we call the AFL-CIO.
And you started out in labor as a worker and not in the union organization.
That's correct. I mean, most of you'll actually see today for the United Steelworkers, the overwhelming even international reps who now are responsible for all of the collective bargaining agreements and the grievance and arbitration system and whatnot, all at one time started in one of our workplaces. And that's traditionally how the steelworkers have done it, is to promote people from within the organization. In the old days, we used to call it from the plant floor. Today, most organizations are so diversified, we tend to use workplace instead of plant floor.
Right, understood. Now, how about you, Ed? You've been, involved in the labor movement for a long, long time, and you're currently with IBEW, but obviously you've been around quite a bit. Can you talk a little bit about your history with labor?
Sure. I became a member of the IBEW in 1966 when I, right out of the U.S. Navy, went to work in a power plant in West Springfield, and the IBEW was already there. They represented the workforce there. And I went to work doing very much what I'd done in number 2 main engine room on the USS America for a couple of years before that. And became a member of the union, and just like Joe, after a while, got kind of active and started doing some things and got elected recording secretary of my local and eventually president of my local and business manager, which is the full-time, chief primary officer of a local union in the IBEW. And I did that for 16 years as a full-time union official before being appointed to international representative in 1988, and I've been doing that ever since. And in the meantime, I've always been very active in the AFL-CIO, which is, as Joe mentioned, the umbrella organization that all of the unions belong to and work under. And I was one of Fiore's predecessors. I spent a few years in the early 90s as the president of the Pioneer Valley Central Labor Council, and been a vice president and now executive vice president of the Massachusetts AFL-CIO since 1986.
And Fiore, you're newly elected, but obviously you've come up through other positions. And what trade did you start out in, and where have you come from there?
I'm actually with Ironworkers Local 7. We're based out of Boston. We actually cover the full jurisdiction of the 4 states, Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, and again, all of Massachusetts. I got in the ironworking industry probably about 21 years old, so I've been doing it for about 30 years. And as an ironworker, pretty much worked in all aspects of our profession. What started getting me in the Labor Council or the AFL-CIO movement was I saw that we were really bad on construction sites when it came to a lot of the college projects, especially up here in this Hampshire, this area right here that we're in. And I started attending AFL-CIO meetings up at the Hampshire Franklin. Attended them for about 2 or 3 years, and the Jonathan Tuttle, the president that was in at the time, had retired.
Right.
So I ran for the position of president. Actually, just stepped down as president of the Hampshire Franklin Labor Council to take this position of the Pioneer Valley Central Labor Council. We have made some great inroads working with a lot of the union campuses, especially UMass, and I'm looking forward to working with all the unions in the Pioneer Valley and moving the labor movement forward in that hat also.
Gotcha.
But I also am still a business agent for Ironworkers Local 7.
You said earlier that you've done all different aspects of ironworking, and does that? I mean, I was a bricklayer, a union bricklayer many years ago, and I don't know what the many different aspects of being an iron worker are, and I wonder if you could talk about that.
Most people instantly, when you think of iron worker, think of just the steel frame building, which is really what we do, and that's where we're right out there, and everybody looks like, wow, look at those crazy guys. But we also do the bridge work, of course. Something as simple as putting the bars in the concrete, which you don't see. So we're one of the first trades to go in there and start with the foundation.
Yeah.
And again, that would be the bars that go in. But we do, when you see an all glass front building, that's called curtain wall, we put up that. Precast, whether it's on the outside or a parking garage. Today I'm actually in charge of the wind turbines for the Ironworkers Union and all of New England. I also wear that hat. So, my guys just erected the 19 up in Florida, Monroe.
Right.
I actually just got done with that project.
No, Ed mentioned he was in the Navy. Are workers in boat yards, shipyards, or are they also iron worker members of your union?
We do have guys in shipyards, specifically welders and that nature. So we're in the mix of the boat yards, yes.
Right. Understood. Now, on a different matter, labor related, and your comment brought it up in my mind. We recently interviewed Governor Patrick here, and as I'm sure you know, he's got a budget proposal that he's put forward, and it's got an educational and sort of infrastructure component to it, and it's getting a lot of attention on Beacon Hill. A lot of different opinions about it. The Gov's promoting it, and I wonder what your thoughts are on that overall proposal, what effect it might have on workers and job opportunities.
Beneficial. In some form, that revenue package is, I think, critical to the future economy of the state, both in terms of infrastructure and higher ed, which I have a very strong interest in as well. It's controversial. I think it was Freddie Langoni that used to say everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. Right? Everybody wants state government to do the things that are necessary for us to have the kind of an infrastructure that we need to be viable economically, but people are reluctant to pay for it, and they always want somebody else to pay for it. But of course, it can't work that way. The same thing with higher ed, and with education really at all levels, but my particular focus at the moment is higher ed because I have a role with the Board of Trustees at the University of Massachusetts as well. And that is that every year we end up in the same kind of dilemma, and that is that the cost of running a world-class research university continue to go up, and the way that you have to pay for it, unfortunately, because of the declining level of state support, has been to ask students to pay for it in the form of higher fees, which nobody likes doing. But if the choice is between doing that and cutting into the core mission or the quality of the university, then fees are going to go up. And the main reason fees have been going up is because state support has been on a downward trajectory now for a number of years. It's now down around 29% of the cost of educating a student at a state college or university is actually paid for by the state, which almost makes you say, is it worthy of the name state university any longer? So I think that piece of the governor's revenue package is critical and important, just as the infrastructure piece. But we're in general, although we have proposed our own plan, which is similar but not identical, you know, we are very, very much in support of, by one mechanism or another, raising the revenue necessary to do these things. And the way the governor's proposed to do it, by the way, is a very progressive way of doing it, because he's talked about increasing the income tax and adding a number of deductions that don't exist now that would hold people under somewhere around $60,000 a year harmless, and cutting the sales tax, which of course is the tax that falls most heavily on working class and poor people. So it on its own, you know, even if it weren't for, you know, the good reasons to do it, for education and infrastructure, reforming our tax code in a way that makes it more progressive is a laudable goal in and of itself.
You know, the way you describe it makes it sound very reasonable, as did the governor when he was here a week or two ago. And with all that reasonableness, one would imagine that the legislature would be flocking to it and just lining up to vote for it.
Don't seem to be happening.
Right, that doesn't seem to be the case. And, you know, by your estimates, what's the likelihood of it moving through in some form, and how, and why aren't they embracing it?
Wow. Why don't you ask me something simple like the meaning of life? You know, I guess the second part of the question is easier to answer than the first. I think there's an understandable reluctance and reticence to raise taxes at all on the part of the legislature, even though I think the appetite for it, according to the polls that have been coming out recently, the appetite for it among voters is probably better now than it's been in a long, long time. And I don't know if that's fully sunk in with elected officials yet. But look, you have to be sensitive to the fact that that, you know, they are reluctant to incur the wrath and the ire of the voters. And you know, look, this is a long process, but I remain optimistic that many, if not most of them, are going to not only understand the need for this and the benefits of it, but are going to have a greater comfort zone around the public's readiness to accept it. And I think getting, you know, more of the public on board, because legislators understandably respond to what they perceive the public wanting, that's part of our job. And it's the job of anybody who wants to see this happen, is to get out there and make the public case for it.
Right. Joe, I mean, based on intuition, it would seem that this kind of proposal would be good for workers.
Well, and that's certainly true, Ben. And most people, one thing that we're all watching, whether it's just here in our Commonwealth or across the country, is people are marveling at the recovery of the stock market, and one thing. But what everybody's amazed at is the jobless recovery. And I think when you come back home to Massachusetts, whether it's the governor's plan or some of the part of the AFL-CIO's plan in labor-friendly representatives, the act to invest in our communities is the nickname or the name for the competing plans. And I think people of well intent can argue over which is the best way to raise revenue. But I think we all know, as Ed said, we have a responsibility to invest in our infrastructure. One thing that you can create jobs in a hurry, from the manufacturing products that have to be made to the building trades jobs that get created. If you invest in our infrastructure, I mean, people marvel at what in Eisenhower's day they were able to do across America, building the road system and the interstate highway across 50 states in America. I refuse to accept that we cannot do that today and invest in our colleges. You listen to the stories of the debt that young people are leaving college with, and it is the responsibility of all of us, I think, to raise the appropriate revenue that children aren't filing for bankruptcy the day after they graduate, from some of our finer institutions, and having some first-class highways to drive to those graduations in.
Right. Well, the problem, as Ed has mentioned, is getting people to understand that they have to pay for these things in some way or the other. And it would seem to me that the formulation the governor is proposing, at least broadly, is in line with what the president has been able to get, sort of move forward on a national level in terms of taxing people at a higher income, making it more progressive. And, the fact that it would be good for workers and good for people doesn't necessarily mean that they want to pay for it. I wanted to talk a little bit about an issue that people in Western Mass are focusing on. That's the casinos. I think that I believe unions have been behind that as a general matter. And what are your thoughts about it moving forward? And I know I'll ask Fiore because of the building component to it.
We, in the Pioneer Valley, well, right around Springfield, there's actually 4 that are trying to get a casino. There's definitely going to be one picked. We have a understanding with all 4 casinos that they will be built using union labor for the construction aspect. It's going to create a lot of jobs, a lot of work for the local workers. We expect all the building trades to open up our apprentice programs to residents, minorities, and females. We all know that the local dollar spent changes hands. I think they say about 6 or 7 times. So all your businesses should see an increase in business money being spent local. As far as the interior jobs, we do expect those to be good paying jobs, but I do need to point out that if they're not union jobs, they will not be good paying jobs. Everybody's talking about these $30,000, $40,000 jobs. Without the unions in there, these will be probably $10 jobs.
You're talking about in the casino.
The actual
themselves.
workers in the casino
Right.
themselves.
That's something I was going to ask next, which is that you say you have agreements with the 4 entities that want to put a casino in, that they will build them with union labor, but no agreement or understanding that the workers ultimately, when the casinos are done, will be union.
There is written into the language was there will be harmony inside. So, I think we need to look a little further is define the harmony part. Does that really mean that we're going to have unions in there or not? My expectation and goal is to see union workers in every aspect of that casino inside. And we have started conversations with them, looking for neutrality agreements, things of that nature.
Right. I would think that at this stage, well before ground gets broken anywhere, that you're leveraged to, well, what effect does this early stage of the process have on your ability to negotiate down for that kind of issue down the line?
The councils themselves have to be somewhat careful, because you got to remember, we're just trying to go in and say we want to see unions inside.
Right.
But there are also people under us that we represent and are part of our councils, other unions that, there's a cross. One union might want, particular workers, and another union wants them. So we're just there to say we would like to see or want to see unions inside the casinos. That's what the council's position is. We're actually talking about having a meeting, hopefully right after our up-and-coming meeting, to discuss what the exact role of my council is going to be in this. But with that said, we do want to see casinos inside, unions inside, and that's going to be one of the major steps that we're going to take is to see that. Whether we, talk to each one individually, the good news is there are 4. So at this point, you do have a little bit of a competition. Well, this guy said they're going to be union. What about you? So we would get to play that hand against each other, and hopefully they're all going to step up and say we want to be union inside. That's what our ultimate goal would be. So no matter who gets picked, we're already set inside.
Yeah.
A couple things on that. Number one, to your question of is this the time when you have the most leverage? Clearly, yes. Okay. Secondly, one thing you need to understand is as a matter of law, there are some big differences between what can be extracted from any potential employer on a construction, because getting them to make a commitment to do a project labor agreement and hire union only, that can be done in the construction field under federal law.
Right.
But getting them to make that ironclad commitment to have their workforce be union before they hire any employees under federal law for the people who are going to work in the casino, that can't be done for reasons that are beyond trying to explain at this point. That's just the way it is. So the limitation that's on unions in trying to assure that the internal workforce be union, the most that you can do is get them to commit to what Fiore mentioned: neutrality, card check, first contract arbitration for whatever union may happen to organize their workers, because the decision of the in-house workers on whether or not to be union is theirs, and that's under the National Labor Relations Act. So trying to get everyone to step up and say, I'll agree to have a neutral approach, and I'm not going to put on an anti-union campaign, and if the union gets a majority of cards signed, I'll recognize the union, and if we can't get agreement on our first contract, we'll agree to submit it to binding arbitration. That's what the council is trying to work on now, and getting them to make commitments to for whatever union may happen to show up to organize those employees. And the harmony part that Fiore mentioned, that's actually something that's embedded in the legislation, that the Gaming Commission, in deciding which casino gets the license, one of the matters that they are supposed to weigh by law is whether or not there's labor harmony. Now, there's no precise definition of what that means, but certainly someone who's signed a neutrality agreement has got a harmonious relationship with organized labor, more harmonious than someone who has not. I mean, that's, I think, a no-brainer. Yeah.
And one of the important pieces of it, too, is all of these organizations and firms that want to partner with Massachusetts people in putting these casinos all have a track record. We know from the communities they're coming out of, whether it's Las Vegas, whether it's Atlantic City, what their track record is, or whether they're just coming from Connecticut in some cases. We know what their track record is. You know what people's true colors are, and whether when they say they're going to come in, because history tells us in any type of workplace, a great deal of people, regardless whether it's a casino or other workplaces, have a desire to be unionized. But the problem is, so many people are just afraid of their employment, and they're afraid of the wrath of their bosses, and quite frankly, to put their livelihood in jeopardy. We're very, very confident when the casinos are built and the workers are given the opportunity to unionize without fear of their livelihood, that we'll be very successful. And as Ed said, whatever union is successful in organizing that group of members, we're sure there'll be an opportunity for people that make a good living and to support their families.
Part of the role of the council also is going to be educating the workers too, because what we have to do is inform them. Most people, they didn't know what a union stands for. What's it about? Why should I pay dues? What representation do I get? So I think we have to educate these workers, so when the unions do approach them, they know what to expect and the reason why they want to join the union. So I think it's going to be heavy on us to educate the workers that are going to be in there just what a union is and why you want to be part of it.
Understood. And earlier on, you mentioned that if it were not unionized, it might be $10 an hour jobs as opposed to fair wages. And the underlying premise behind the casinos as they are conceived is that they'll be good for the economy.
Right.
So if, in fact, those workers are not paid a fair wage, does that underlying premise sort of get undermined?
And I think Joe touched on it. There are track records and places that you can look at to see, some of the history on what the economy is like around a casino that is unionized versus one that isn't. So there are some casinos that are more union friendly, others that aren't, and it's pretty open to see this. And I think this is going to weigh into part of both the state's decision, but more so the public's, because just pick Springfield, you have to pick one or the other. I think that's kind of the way people are going, is to, only one being presented for Springfield.
Right.
So, is there a clear choice between one over the other? I think if given enough information, people are going to be able to make a clear choice as to which one is going to be the higher paying jobs, the more union-friendly casino. So they both need to do their homework to educate the public of what they stand for and what they're offering. And I think that'll drive, like I said, the competition can be good.
Right.
And you actually have a good example of that right now in Atlantic City. There's a new $1 billion casino that's opened in the last year, could be 18 months now. And the people who have opened that casino are insisting it stays non-union. They're trying to run that casino with all part-time employees. They refuse to even sit down and have a conversation with any representatives of an organized labor, and they're teetering on bankruptcy. They cannot get that casino up off the ground, while most of the other casinos, due to the current economy, are not doing gangbusters, but they're holding their own and maintaining, good jobs and good workplace while they thrive. And the guy who's trying to do it on the cheap with low-cost workers and part-time jobs and not pay any benefits will probably be bankrupt by the time you air this show.
Yeah. And I guess the simplest way to look at it, too, is, nobody from Massachusetts, much less Western Massachusetts, is going to own these casinos. So the question of whether or not the labor force inside the casino is union, I think really goes straight to the question of how much money that casino makes stays in the local economy.
Yeah.
So regardless of what your thoughts may be about unions, if you live in the community that's going to be host to that casino, and you want the maximum economic benefit for your community, you want a union representing the people in that casino.
Now, the relationship, and I'm going to transition a little bit here to a more sort of national kind of picture of things, but it would seem to me, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, but it would seem to me that the relationship between employers, corporations, and workers has shifted fairly significantly, and that's partly perhaps the reason behind the decline of unions in terms of numbers. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the history over the last 20 or 30 years of the labor movement. And we talked about this a little bit earlier, Ed.
Yeah. Well, as we were discussing before we went on the air, if you take sort of a long view of history, the birth of the labor movement was in conflict, and it was conflict between employers and unions, and employers vigorously resisted union organizing, sometimes violently, often violently resisted union organizing. There came a point, without going into too much detail, towards the end of the Great Depression and the beginning of World War II, where that shifted for reasons that we don't have time to go into on this program, but it shifted to one of a much more accommodation, where employers began to recognize that, like it or not, unions were here to stay, and they might as well deal with them instead of fighting with them. And that period lasted all the way up until roughly 1980, where there was a much more cooperative labor management relationship broadly throughout the country. And with PATCO had more sort of symbolic importance than actual importance in this shift. But beginning with the President of the United States signaling every employer in the country that union busting was in fashion once again, and you wouldn't be considered a national pariah if you engaged in it, things began to shift. And they shifted over a long, long period of time to where there was, very often open warfare between corporations and unions. Now, that wasn't universal. There are companies that have been union and remained union throughout that whole time who have never tried to engage in union busting and still maintained a reasonably good relationship with their employees. But in terms of trying to organize new companies, an era of all-out resistance came into effect, and because unions weren't able to organize new workers as fast as the labor force grew, their numbers, at least their union density number, the percentage of the workforce that belongs to unions, began a long, slow decline. Actually, the decline started a little bit before that. It began with the Taft-Hartley Act in 1947, but it really took off in the early 1980s. And it wasn't actually a decline in actual numbers of union members until this last terrible recession. The number of actual union members remained pretty static during that whole time, but the labor force was getting bigger.
Right, the percentage
faster,
of the labor
so the
force
percentage
was
going
right,
down,
understood.
Yeah. So, yeah, organizing today, and if you're out there doing it today, you often hear people say it's harder than it's ever been. Well, that's not really true. It's harder than it's been in any of our lifetimes. But it's not harder than it was for those guys in 1915 and 1920. It was harder then, and they succeeded then.
Right.
And there's no reason to think that we haven't reached. And another thing we were talking about before this show started, Joe had mentioned he thinks we're at or very close to a tipping point where people are tired of getting abused by corporations and ready to do something about it. And I think that's true. And I think when that moment arrives, even under incredible obstacles, people will do what they have to do to enhance their living standards and protect themselves from the abuses of corporate America, which are at a high point in my lifetime right now.
Well, to that point, you mentioned that there has been a sort of there have been more difficult days for the union movement in the past, and certainly union members are not being shot at by their employers these days as they used to be, but companies certainly do have their arsenal of weapons that they're using against the labor movement. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on in terms of nationally and in terms of state efforts, a la Wisconsin and Ohio, et cetera. But Joe, you did mention earlier that there's sort of a tipping point at some point that has to be reached. It may be now, it may be 2 weeks from now or 2 years from now. Talk a little bit more about that.
And it could very well just be the optimist in me. But I really believe that that corporate greed will eventually get the best of them. When you look at all of the data, all of the statistics, what the executives made and the CEOs, and use whatever titles you choose to use, the folks who were responsible for running America's biggest companies, percentage of what they made versus the people who worked in the various workplaces would maybe be historically 5 or 6, 10 times what they made. Now it's in the hundreds. Use 700, 800 times. You see it every day. Some guy's getting fired because he was incompetent running his plant in his huge conglomerate, and he gets billions of, not at least multiples of millions of dollars as a golden parachute, while they begrudge a guy who's, who may be a maintenance man, who's cleaning the facility. Any type of increase, most people know that people who work in America, it's 25, 30 years, has not in real dollars received a raise. I think that the time is going to come that people who work in this country are going to say enough is enough. It's not that there's not the resources to be shared or that the profit's not there. It's just in whose pocket does it go. And I think people are going to have their fill of it and be willing to once again face those hard times that people did that made this country so great by organizing in the earlier times that Ed talked about. That was the birth of the labor movement. And it's not going to be easy, but I think for most of us realize there's not too much that's really worth having that comes to you easy. And I think the time will come that you will really see a resurgence of this labor movement.
Well, you see efforts on a state-by-state basis to sort of undermine unions by sapping them of revenue, and that occurred in there's the quote-unquote paycheck fairness efforts. There's the barring of state employees to collectively bargain, and I wonder the extent to which You always hear in discussions of Citizens United, the Supreme Court ruling that it bars that allows now corporations and unions to give to political campaigns. The questions are, obviously, is that a false equivalence?
Absolutely.
Of course.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we would gladly, in a heartbeat, see the reversal of Citizens United and, lose the great right that it supposedly endowed organized labor with to, to participate politically in the same fashion that it freed corporations to do, because they can outspend us 300 or 400 to 1. I mean, unions have always been active politically, and they do it through voluntary contributions, and Citizens United doesn't expand or change that in any way, but basically it says that corporations can spend unlimited sums of money, much of it anonymously, to directly affect the outcome of elections by buying their own independent ads and so forth, and we'd like to see that go away. And generally speaking, we're very much behind the concept of a constitutional amendment, because that's about the only thing that's ever going to reverse Citizens United. But and it galls me too when I hear them reported as, oh, this means unions and corporations. I mean, come on. I mean, it's David and Goliath there when it comes to who has how much money to spend politically, and they're taking full advantage of it, and that's why you saw some of the stuff that you saw go on out in Wisconsin. May their tribe increase, those two disc jockeys, whoever they were out there in Wisconsin that got coke on the air, or the governor out there, Walker, on the air, thinking he was talking to coke, saying, yeah, that's right, pour it on, we're going to go, crush those unions, because that is really what it's all about. And that's, you mentioned earlier about, they used to shoot at you, now they have other ways, and the other ways, are with a checkbook and a briefcase. And so that's why you see the attack at the state level. You don't have to go out to Wisconsin or Ohio, by the way. I mean, we fought a tremendous battle right here in New England, up in New Hampshire, against right to work, and we're finally, we got some breathing room now after this last election, but we came within a hair's breadth of New Hampshire becoming a right-to-work state. And if it hadn't been for the support of a handful of Republican members of the state legislature up there, who finally said, this isn't right and this isn't fair, and would not vote to override the Democratic governor's veto up there, we'd have been there. Right. It can happen here is the star. And the other thing is, the Republican control of the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C., where this sort of new attack on the labor movement that happens, with the alligator shoes and the three-piece suits instead of the shotgun and the bullwhip, is what is happening with the National Labor Relations Board. And they've crippled the National Labor Relations Board's ability to enforce the labor laws, because they won't approve, and they can block the United States. I said the House, it's the Senate. The United States Senate will not approve any of President Obama's appointments to the NLRB, and they've deprived the board of the majority it needs to make any decisions.
Is that a 5-member board?
It's a 5-member board, and you have to have 3 members on it in order for any of their decisions to be legally valid. Right now they've only got 2, and the Republican members of the Senate, even though the Democrats are in the majority because of their arcane rules on filibuster, they can stop any appointment they want. And it doesn't matter who the president appoints, they will not approve them, because they want to cripple the labor board. They don't want the labor board is supposed to be the guarantor of the rights of American workers to form, join, and assist unions and bargain collectively. And the Republican strategy is to turn it into a graveyard of the legitimate aspirations of the American worker. And at the moment, they're succeeding. And that's the sort of ground that the battle, corporate battle against unions has shifted to today, and it's a battle that has to be won politically.
I want to bring it back local from that point. A couple years ago, there was an effort in the budget to allow municipalities to basically exempt employees from collective bargaining for health care benefits. Am I summarizing it correctly?
Yeah.
And you know, I wonder if you see that in some way in the context of the larger erosion of the labor movement. Do you find it surprising that it was supported here in Massachusetts in the legislature, which presumably is overall pro-labor, and where is that today?
Well, you have to talk about the full piece of the legislation, because one thing that was written into that legislation when the unions had an opportunity to put their input into it before it passed and was enacted is that every one of the municipalities has to have a committee to deal with their health insurance issues, and made up of the labor unions that are represented in that municipality. Even if there's a group that are not represented, has the opportunity to have somebody on that committee, and then they will, you know, work with the various municipalities on what is the best way to address their health insurance. And my numbers are 6 or 7 months old, but if they come to loggerheads, there was a committee that the governor appointed, and last that I knew, there still had not one municipality that had to go in front of that committee to have like an arbiter make a decision for them on what they needed to do. Every one of the municipalities working with their unions have been able to work it out, and very, very few have actually chosen to go into the GIC, because most of the municipalities realize, contrary to what they would get you to believe, that's not the best bang for your buck in the Commonwealth. You can do much better negotiating with the various insurers than you can by just going into the state pool.
Right. But, I mean, Fiore, as far as you understand it, and nobody can know the mind of a legislator, but what was the thinking when it came time to decide whether to support this effort or not in the legislature, and what were the efforts of unions to influence the opinions of legislators on that?
See, it's kind of tough for me to really give a lot of input on this subject.
Sure.
Because you got to remember, I'm from the construction industry.
Right.
So in the construction industry, most of us are self-insured, but there is some bargaining. You know, we're always trying to get a better deal. You know, so I really would have to defer to my colleagues on this, because as a construction guy, we really didn't. We were part of the movement, but we didn't play as an active role because it didn't affect our members directly. So a lot of times my construction hat is more predominant than my AFL-CIO hat, especially the fact that I was part of a smaller council up in Hampshire, Franklin. So Ed might be able to answer that a little bit better.
Yeah, I guess what I would say is that, in answer to your question, is, am I surprised that it occurred? No. I'm a little bit surprised that it got as much traction as it did. But, you know, the reason why this issue surfaced the way it did legislatively in the first place goes back to something we were talking about at the very beginning of the show, and that, you know, that is, there isn't enough money there, and you know, I don't think that legislators spurred on by municipal officials woke up one morning and said, let's see how we can go, you know, croak the public sector unions and rip away their bargaining rights and diminish people's health care. That would be a nice thing to do. I mean, I think they were under a squeeze of not enough revenue to pay for what is the biggest overall you know, problem that we seem to have in the country about trying to get a control over radically increasing health costs, and in a situation where municipal budgets are, you know, are strained by these things. So this was, I think, a meat-axe approach, a short-sighted approach. It ended up with a compromise that, frankly, organized labor would prefer not to have had to make, but as Joe's pointed out correctly, one that seems to be working. Okay, it's I don't think it's the last that we've heard of you know, sort of tension between the rights of public workers to collectively bargain and the legitimate pressures that state and local government are feeling from restrained revenue in the face of increasing cost. I mean, that's something that's going to, in one form or another, continue to be around for a while. But the first big step towards improving it is to figure out a way to get more revenue and to do it in a fair way that doesn't overly burden middle class and working and poor people. And that's why I think, coming back full circle to the earlier part of the program, why I think it's in a lot of people's interest who haven't yet figured out it's in their interest to support, this approach.
Now, why this distinction between public employee unions and private sector unions in terms of the focus on undermining them? I mean, are the rights of public sector employees and privately employed union workers any different substantively, and why are they treated differently?
Well, they're different in the sense that they flow from a different legal source. The private sector, most of the private sector, except for agricultural workers, are covered under the National Labor Relations Act, which we've talked about. Each state decides for itself how it's going to frame the collective bargaining rights of public workers, so it's a state-by-state issue. Massachusetts has, at least on paper, a relatively good public employee bargaining law. And if you're asking, why is the attack on public sector workers, my sort of overview of that is that it's an attack that had been occurring in the private sector for 30 years before it started to play itself out in the public sector. The move to constrain collective bargaining rights in the public sector is fairly recent. And I think the reason for that is that I think publicly elected officials were much more reluctant. I think there's a price to be paid by them that is not a price that's paid by the owners and managers of private business when you start kicking workers around and kicking unions around. And in order to do that and have the political cover to do that, and this is not so much about Massachusetts as it is perhaps about Wisconsin and Ohio and other states, you have to create a political climate in which you make the union into a villain. And you can't do that overnight, especially in industrial states like Ohio and Indiana and Wisconsin, where unions were generally held in very high esteem.
Right.
It takes you a long time to sort of do this public campaign of trying to make the union the problem of the country. Everything that's wrong with the country is because of organized labor. They spent a long time doing that before they got to a point where they felt it was safe for them to do this frontal attack on public workers. And I think there's a big job to do in getting people to wake up to what's really going on.
Now, I wanted to finish with something about unions in Massachusetts. Now, Massachusetts doesn't have clearly the kind of economy that it has had in ages past. We are not a manufacturing hub, although that seems to be a bit on the rise in certain areas like clean energy, etc. What new organizing opportunities and what ability is there for the union movement to organize in new sectors, healthcare workers, home aides, et cetera, that will strengthen the union movement in Massachusetts and, for that matter, nationally?
I actually think you're going to see an emergence of the organized labor in places that we're not even aware of today, that have not existed. One place that I think is fertile ground is, quite frankly, is all the fast food industry. You take the McDonald's, the Burger Kings, the Wendy's of this world, and I know there's some complications because each one of the places is a small independent place, but there's got to be a way that those work sites need to be strung together. If there's some of the most profitable places in the world, then you can go into the whole banking sector, the whole insurance sector. There's a great big sector of the modern economy today that organized labor hasn't historically been involved in. But I think, once again, as those corporations and as those companies continue to exploit those workers, at least in my definition of exploiting them, is not, doing fair increases and not paying a fair amount of their health insurance and various benefits that people come to enjoy and need out of necessity, that we'll find a way, and there'll be a people, and it may be folks who come into this business after I'm long retired, but I think there's fertile ground for a whole host of places that historically, and just look at it this way. The highest percentage of workers in America today are public sector workers. Before President Kennedy, there were no public sector workers that were even organized. And that's in our lifetime. That will happen again in whole new segments of our economy, I think, that will wind up being organized, that we don't even come to our mind as we talk about it here today.
Yeah, I think Joe's absolutely right about that. The labor movement has almost no influence whatsoever over what the economy is going to look like in the future and what sort of jobs there are going to be. But whatever they are, the needs of the people who work in those industries are not going to be any different than they were the needs of the people who worked in heavy industry. That they want secure employment, they want fair wages, they want decent treatment on the job, and they want some level of job security. And that the only real way to gain any, if not all, of those things is through collective action. That trying to negotiate individually with your boss, unless you happen to be the star pitcher that every ball team in the league wants, is never going to be as great as what you can do together. That's a fundamental truism that isn't going to change regardless of what the shape of our future economy looks like. You mentioned healthcare earlier, and some of the most active organizing that's going on right now is in the healthcare industry. And although it's still more non-union than it is union, some of the greatest advances in organizing have been in the healthcare industry, and very often at the part of the industry that has been fairly well organized is the most highly skilled aspects of it, skilled nursing and so forth. Some of the lesser skilled aspects of the healthcare delivery system are where some of the most active organizing is going on right now. And whatever form our future economy takes in this state, and wherever the new jobs are going to come from, that's where the labor movement's going to be, trying to organize and trying to do the things that we have historically done for the industries that traditionally made up our economy. I mean, I grew up here. I've lived here all my life, and Springfield was a manufacturing city when I was growing up. And I could roll the names off my tongue of the large industries that, some of which don't exist at all anymore, but if they do, they're offshore someplace. And, which I don't want to get too far afield here, but allowing them to make all that money offshore and not pay any taxes on it, is a whole other issue that I think we as a country have to begin to face up to.
And I know there's some significant barriers to organizing in the healthcare field, but I'm also not surprised to hear that it's a fertile ground for organizing. Now, Fiore, just to close, well, I mean, what do you think are some of the new opportunities to organize?
One of the things to add to Joe's list is immigrant workers too.
Mm-hmm.
That is a hot topic today. I think there's definitely a lot of workers, getting taken advantage of, by these bad apple employers, and whatever their status is, they still should have conditions of employment should still apply to these workers, period. And it's definitely coming. There's going to be a lot of talk about it, and I think the labor movement is moving towards helping these workers, get the fair representation that they need and deserve. Understood. Well, gentlemen, listen, I really do want to thank you for sitting with us today and talking about labor movement in Massachusetts and nationally. And thanks for sitting with Emphasis Massachusetts. Joe Carlson, Ed Collins, and Fiore Grassetti. Thank you, sir. Thank you. And that's it for Emphasis Massachusetts. Thanks for watching.